What would you do if a single piece of paper unraveled your entire relationship? For Albertino Castellini, a 35-year-old engineer and inventor, this question set off a chain of events that tested the limits of love, trust, and forgiveness. His journey with Jane Roma, a spirited 32-year-old graphic designer, reveals that sometimes heartbreak is the only path to a deeper connection. Albertino Castellini's life thrived on order. As a 35-year-old engineer and inventor, he believed everything had its place, from the blueprints on his desk to the trust he shared with Jane Roma, his partner of 4 years. That belief was shattered on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. While sorting through a stack of papers at home, Albertino noticed something strange: a receipt for a credit card he didn't recognize. At first, he thought it was a mistake. He scrutinized it closely, a hefty purchase from a boutique he'd never heard of. The item description was vague, the date was recent, and most concerningly, it wasn't from a store Jane usually frequented. Albertino's mind raced, the once familiar feeling of security in his relationship slipping away. He told himself not to jump to conclusions. There's probably a simple explanation, he thought. But the doubt had already taken root. The man who prided himself on logic and problem-solving now faced a question that no algorithm could answer: was Jane keeping secrets? The receipt was a silent messenger, and it carried a weight that would test the foundation of their relationship. Albertino always believed that love was like one of his inventions, a delicate balance of precision and passion. At 35, his career as an engineer and inventor was soaring. His projects were precise, reliable, and always achieved their intended outcomes. Unfortunately, relationships didn't follow the same rules. Jane Roma, a 32-year-old graphic designer, was the vibrant contrast to Albertino's meticulous personality. She loved spontaneity, thrived on creativity, and often joked that Albertino's schedule was so predictable she could set her watch to it. Their differences had once been magnetic, but lately they had become sources of tension. Albertino longed for stability, for Jane to share his dream of a future where they built a life together: marriage, a home, and perhaps even a family. But Jane hesitated when the topic of commitment came up. She valued her independence, sometimes pulling away when Albertino pushed too hard for certainty. The receipt felt like a manifestation of his worst fears, that Jane wasn't ready to share her whole life with him. But was this truly a sign of betrayal, or was it his own insecurity speaking? As he tried to focus on his work, Albertino couldn't shake the image of that receipt, its implications gnawing at the back of his mind. Determined to confront his fears and clarify their future, Albertino planned a special evening. Uncle Vincent's restaurant was a family staple, intimate, warm, and steeped in nostalgia. He chose the private booth near the back, where the soft glow of candlelight and the faint aroma of fresh basil created the perfect romantic ambience. In his pocket, he carried the ring he had purchased months ago, a simple yet elegant piece that symbolized his unwavering love for Jane. As the evening unfolded, Albertino felt the weight of the moment growing heavier. Jane seemed distant, her eyes flickering with a trace of unease as they moved from the menu to his face. Finally, as dessert arrived, Albertino decided it was time. He reached for her hand, his voice steady but his heart racing. "Jane, I've thought about this for a long time," he began. "I love you, and I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Jane's breath hitched, and for a moment, silence filled the air. Then, with a trembling voice, she said, "Albertino, I care about you deeply, but I'm not ready. Not for marriage. Not for marriage. Not for exclusivity." Her words felt like a thunderclap. Albertino's mind reeled as he tried to process the rejection. "Not ready? After all this time?" he asked, his voice cracking. Jane nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm scared, Albertino. I'm not sure I can be the person you need me to be." The rest of the evening was a blur. Albertino left the ring on the table, walked out of the restaurant, and into the cold night air. For the first time in years, he felt truly lost. The breakup left a void in both their lives. Albertino threw himself into his work, spending countless hours in his workshop surrounded by blueprints and machinery. The rhythmic hum of his tools was the only sound that filled the deafening silence of his empty apartment. He created inventions that amazed his colleagues, but none of them could fix the ache in his chest. Jane, on the other hand, found solace in her art. Her sketches took on a melancholic tone, reflecting the emotions she struggled to articulate. Friends encouraged her to move on, but every time she tried, memories of Albertino crept in: the way he laughed, the way he meticulously planned their weekends, the way he had always believed in her potential. Neither of them reached out, too stubborn and too hurt to bridge the gap. Yet, in their solitude, both began to reflect. Albertino realized he had been rigid, perhaps too focused on controlling the outcome of their relationship. Jane, meanwhile, started to question if her fear of commitment was rooted in self-doubt rather than a genuine desire for independence. Their time apart wasn't just about heartbreak, it was a period of growth. They both began to understand themselves better, even as they secretly wondered if they had lost the love of their lives forever. Months had passed since their breakup, but the wound still felt fresh for Albertino. On a dreary, rain-soaked afternoon, he found himself rushing through the crowded streets of the city, his thoughts scattered. Just as he turned a corner, he saw her, Jane. She stood on the opposite sidewalk, her umbrella shielding her from the rain, her face partially obscured. Albertino froze. His first instinct was to avoid her at all costs. He wasn't ready for an awkward confrontation, let alone the flood of emotions her presence would bring. Turning abruptly, he attempted to cross the street, but the rain-slicked pavement betrayed him. His foot slipped, and he went down hard, landing awkwardly on his side with a sharp jolt of pain. Through the haze of discomfort, he heard someone shouting his name. When he opened his eyes, Jane was there, kneeling beside him, her umbrella discarded and her expression filled with worry. "Albertino, are you okay?" she asked, her voice frantic as she helped him sit up. He grimaced, clutching his arm. "I think I twisted something," he muttered, embarrassed by both the fall and her presence. "You need to get to a hospital," she insisted. Despite his protests, Jane hailed a cab and accompanied him to the emergency room. The familiarity of her touch as she steadied him and the concern etched on her face stirred emotions he had tried to bury. As they waited for the doctor, Albertino couldn't help but notice how effortlessly they slipped back into a rhythm. She scolded him for being careless, and he teased her about always meddling. For the first time in months, they weren't exes, they were just Albertino and Jane. Albertino's injury turned out to be more serious than he thought, a fractured arm requiring surgery. The procedure went smoothly, but a post-surgery infection complicated his recovery, leaving him bedridden and frustrated. To his surprise, Jane became a constant presence. She visited him daily, bringing homemade meals, books, and her warm smile. At first, Albertino was guarded, unsure of her motives. "You don't have to do this," he said one day, his tone tinged with suspicion. Jane looked at him earnestly. "I know I don't, but I want to. I owe you that much." Her care wasn't just practical, it was deeply personal. She listened when he vented his frustrations and laughed at his self-deprecating jokes. She even helped him tinker with one of his smaller inventions, carefully following his instructions. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. One evening, as she helped him adjust his arm sling, Albertino asked, "Why are you really here, Jane?" She hesitated, her hands pausing mid-movement. "Because I care about you, Albertino. I always have." Those words lingered in the air, unspoken truths finally breaking through the silence. For the first time in months, Albertino felt something he hadn't dared to hope for: connection. As Jane continued to support him through his recovery, both began to realize that while their relationship had been flawed, their love for each other had never wavered. It wasn't perfect, but perhaps it was worth fighting for. After weeks of Jane's unwavering support during Albertino's recovery, the distance between them seemed to shrink. But lingering doubts and unspoken feelings still hovered like a shadow. One evening, Albertino found himself alone in his apartment, his arm healing but his heart still aching with unresolved questions. It was then his phone buzzed, and Jane's name lit up the screen. "Hey," she said softly, her voice carrying a blend of hesitation and vulnerability. "Hey," he replied, equally uncertain. For a moment neither spoke, the silence heavy with emotions neither had been able to articulate. Then Jane broke the stillness. "I've been thinking a lot about you," she began, "and about why I wasn't ready before." Albertino's heart raced as he listened. "It wasn't you," Jane continued, her voice trembling. "I was scared. Scared of losing my independence. Scared of failing you. Scared that I'd never live up to what you deserved." Albertino swallowed hard, caught off guard by her honesty. "Jane, I never wanted you to change," he said after a pause. "I just wanted you to be there, to be all in." Jane's breath hitched on the other end of the line. "I know," she whispered, "and I was wrong to push you away." The floodgates opened as both of them confessed the fears, doubts, and regrets that had haunted them since their breakup. For the first time, they truly understood each other. Jane's hesitation wasn't about not loving Albertino, it was about her own insecurities. And Albertino realized his push for certainty had made her feel trapped. By the end of the call, they were both in tears, but for the first time in months, those tears felt cleansing. The conversation wasn't just an emotional breakthrough, it was the bridge they had been searching for, the start of something new. Months after Albertino's recovery, the two had rekindled their relationship cautiously, allowing themselves time to heal and rebuild. But Albertino knew one thing for certain: he didn't want to let Jane slip away again. One crisp autumn evening, he invited her to his workshop, a space she hadn't visited since their breakup. As she stepped inside, Jane noticed something different. In the center of the room was one of Albertino's latest creations, a kinetic sculpture designed with intertwining metal rings that moved in perfect harmony. "What is this?" she asked, marveling at the intricate design. Albertino smiled nervously. "It's something I made with you in mind. It's about balance, about two different forces working together to create something beautiful." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was the same ring he had offered her before, but this time it carried the weight of their shared journey. "Jane," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I know we've both made mistakes, and I know we're not perfect. But I don't want perfection. I want you exactly as you are. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Jane's eyes as she took in the gesture, the sincerity in his words, and the love that had endured through all their struggles. "Yes," she said, her voice cracking. 1,000 times yes. In that moment, surrounded by the tools and inventions that had always been a part of Albertino's life, they found a new beginning. Their relationship wasn't flawless, but it was real, and that was all they needed. The day of Albertino and Jane's wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect reflection of the joy that had blossomed from their tumultuous journey. The venue was a charming countryside villa, adorned with strings of fairy lights and delicate floral arrangements that mirrored Jane's creative touch. It was a wedding, not just of tradition but of individuality, a blend of Albertino's love for precision and Jane's flair for artistry. Friends and family gathered, their faces glowing with happiness as the couple stood at the altar. Albertino's heart swelled with emotion as Jane walked down the aisle, her radiant smile reflecting a mix of nervousness and excitement. She wore a gown that she had designed herself, its simple elegance embodying her personality. Albertino, in a tailored suit, couldn't take his eyes off her. As they exchanged vows, their words were raw and heartfelt, echoing the trials they had endured. Albertino promised to love Jane not despite her fears but because of her courage to overcome them. Jane vowed to stand by Albertino, not just in certainty but in the unknowns they would face together. The ceremony flowed into a lively reception filled with laughter, music, and heartfelt toasts. Uncle Vincent, the owner of the restaurant where their relationship had reached its breaking point, gave a speech that had everyone in stitches. "I've seen proposals go wrong, but this is the first time I've seen one lead to a better one," he quipped. As Albertino and Jane shared their first dance, spinning slowly under the twinkling lights, the guests looked on, moved by the love that had not just survived but thrived against the odds. The wedding marked a turning point, but it wasn't the end of their story, it was a new beginning. Albertino and Jane embraced the lessons they had learned, understanding that their love would always require effort, patience, and a willingness to adapt. Albertino found new inspiration in his work, inventing projects that celebrated collaboration and creativity. Jane expanded her art business, blending her designs with Albertino's innovative concepts, creating pieces that became a hit in their community. The couple made it a point to honor their differences while nurturing their shared dreams. They traveled, hosted dinner parties, and supported each other through challenges big and small. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was filled with love, laughter, and the kind of trust that only comes from overcoming hardship together. Thanks for watching and joining us on this journey. Life and love can be messy, but sometimes the greatest stories are born from the hardest moments. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about love, resilience, and the human experience. Until next time.